Okay,
Okay,
you're on.
works. This is a presentation on details. Just some quotes from, let me go back, which I found interesting about details from Sherlock Holmes, which I read all 53 of his stories. But the whole point of this is that details are important. As John Wooden, famous coach of the UCLA Bruins, said, it's little details that are vital. Harvey Firestone, success is the sum of details. I won't go into the rest. But for many of us, our objective is to create a realistic and interesting scene with our model railroads. Most of us were trying to kind of reproduce real life in a small scale. And so I've always considered model railroading, really we're doing artistic stuff. We're artists, but we're working in 3 dimensions. We're not painting on a canvas or anything. So the question is, what makes a realistic scene? Okay, well, you want to make sure it's prototypic. By that I mean, for example, is it believable? I mean, you don't want to have cowboys and Indians and an old time engine there, and then some modern tank cars or something hooked to it. Is it believable? Does this make sense? And then, of course, you have to ask yourself, what makes an interesting scene, and are the viewer's eyes going to be drawn to it? And once the viewer is actually drawn to a scene, you really would like them to remain focused on it and take in all of the information, all the detail in that scene. So I thought about it and I said, really the objective of this clinic is not to show how you add details to a scene, so much as to show what details can add to a scene. So these are really mostly examples. It's not anything that says, here's a how-to. Here are details you can add. Go out and buy these, and everything will look great. I took this picture some time ago when my office was actually pretty much overlooking the Rockville Metro, which is just off to the right out of the picture. But when I looked out there and I saw, if you take a look, you say, really, everything is different. Okay. For example, how many different color pavements do you see? I figured there was at least about 5 in there. There's some concrete, there's light, there's the dark asphalt, there's a medium color in between, and the like. So, the roadways are not always the same color. How many different color sidewalks do you see? There's at least 3 that I picked up. You can see right there in the sort of middle, there's a sidewalk. It's sort of a brownish gray, but then you can see where they replaced some of the sections with newer concrete, so it's a lighter color. And then signs. Just count all the signs you see it there. I counted 16 just in this one picture. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Some other details. There are a lot of street markings. Notice the left turn arrows where you're going to take a left turn. Notice the dotted line, the double yellow, the crosswalks, and the like. The crosswalks up at not only by the metro entrance where it's a single line, but you've got the double crosswalk over by the intersection with 355. I'm sorry. There's some roof details. If you just look on that building in the upper left, you can see all the, it looks like air conditioning units and air ducts up there. And then the trees. You can see there's a variety of trees, different colors, different styles around there, not all the same. Here are some roof details I found on a Chinese restaurant down in Rockville area. It's maybe an exaggeration, but it's certainly a lot. And there's a whole bunch more. And I always love this one because I always tell people, things in life aren't always perfect or straight. So don't feel bad if you got something that's tilted or tipped or anything. If it, like a telephone pole here. It happens in real life, and there's nothing wrong with it. In terms of building, when you make scenes, try to break up your scenery into individual scenes. You don't want really a continuous one, because then people really can't focus. They're sort of just drawn along. So I always like, at least on my layout, to have individual scenes that are maybe, self-contained. You can create an individual scene by providing something going on or some action taking place. That will draw people's attention. So as the people focus, when your visitors are visiting your layout and they focus on, hey, what's going on in that scene? Then they're going to notice and take into detail, and this will tend to hold their attention. I've tried to put a lot of detail on my layout, and just from experience, when people do come to visit my layout, one of the comments I always hear is, "Wow, you got so much detail! Wow, look at all that detail." And that's because they're seeing it, they're taking it in. So I kind of feel I met my objective in that. So anyway, as I said, my objective is to show you examples of how details can really enhance scenes. And I'm going to use primarily photos from my layout and also from Bernie Halloran. I don't know if any of you have visited Bernie's layout. He's down in Southern Maryland. But it was really a neat layout from the standpoint of detail and everything. I was really impressed. I've got some other layouts that I've taken pictures of during layout tours and stuff. And I just want to, say that the details I'm going to show are by no means a complete list, okay, at all. Okay, they're just representative examples of the kinds of details that you really need to consider. So where do you start? So I said, well, let's take a look at some of the details, and I've tried to identify what I think are major categories. People, street details, building details, building side details, building roof details, track details, signs, weathering, just background and perspective. Now with people, unless you're modeling a deserted area or out in the middle of nowhere, which some people do actually. If you have a line going through the mountains or something, and over a big, with trestles and everything, yeah, you may not see people. But at some point, if there's a terminus on your railroad or something, there's usually people around. There should be, at least. Cities, towns, villages, village streets usually have people walking around doing things. And so really you got to think about, what are people doing in real life? On Jim Brewer's layout, I thought it was neat. He had a traffic cop directing traffic. And he's got a dog and a fire hydrant right over there up in the corner, as you can see. Here's on Jim's layout. I noticed he had a homeowner outside, had a rug on a stand on I guess some sort of a rack, and the homeowner's beating it, trying to clean it, which is kind of neat. That's something you don't see all the time. And of course, it looks like he's got a chicken coop or something right there in the front. An old truck parked in the driveway. On my layout in the New York City scenes I have, I've tried to get the hustle and bustle of New York with a lot of cars, a lot of people on the sidewalks, street lights, traffic lights. You can see cars are parked on the side. There's parking meters. In the back, you can see there's an overhead L train running and the like. There's a subway entrance over on the middle right. On the street there's a fire hydrant. So it's kind of those details that, kind of, really fill up the scene and make it look like it's a hustling, bustling place. This is in front of my Penn Station. You can see again, I've got cars, a lot of cars on the street going around. I've got a lot of people on the sidewalk. There's sidewalk vendors selling probably hot dogs. Again, there's a subway entrance right there, street lights and the like. I will admit I have at this point when on my layout, I had not really done the weathering on the street yet. So that's something that wasn't done at the time when I took the picture. Just to add a little bit of jokes here, if you may remember Marshall Abrams. He passed away a couple of years ago, but I gave him on my layout. He was one of the group in our operating team or crew. And so I gave him his own bar and restaurant there, Marshall's Place. And I put a drunk leaning on the lamppost out there, which people can see. I've got a dog lifting his leg on a fire hydrant. That catches people's attention when they're looking real hard. Here on next to Marshall's Place, I've got a bunch of motorcycles and a street band playing out there for money, which again is sort of something that people will look at. They'll say, what's going on there? And once they'll focus in on it and they'll see. Here's my Long Island City train station. Again, I've tried to put a lot of people waiting for the commuter trains to take them out to Long Island. You can see all the cars, the taxis pulling into the station and the like. And again, I got the street lights. You'll note I put on the station platforms, at least up in New York, all of them would have advertisements for Broadway shows or movies or the like. So I added all of those. Here's an elevated railroad station platform on my layout. This is the Flatbush Avenue station. But again, you can see I've got benches, I've got trash cans, a lot of people waiting for the subway to come. Even though it doesn't really run on third rail, I did try to model a third rail, so it looked realistic. And then here's a busy street scene under the elevated railroad on my layout. As you can see, I've tried to put, I've got the street markings, the dotted lines. I've weathered the street. Usually want to weather it. I'll talk about that in a minute, but cars and trucks will drip oil and stuff and exhaust towards the middle. So the middle usually is a darker area, and then where the tires go is usually lighter. I've put a lot of people on the sidewalk. You can see there's an back window on the sort of in the upper left there. It's one of those elevators that comes up from below grade up onto the sidewalk. I don't know if they have those anymore. I haven't been up in New York City for a while, but I remember when I was a kid, they used to have those, and you have to be careful. You'd have to walk around them. The signs are important there. Those are actually signs I got off the internet. This is supposed to be Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn. I Googled store signs in Brooklyn, and I got a whole pile of them up on Google. I found ones that were square on. In other words, you're not looking at them at an angle. I copied them into my photos page. Then I could crop them down. So I got rid of the building and just had the sign. Then I moved the sign into my drawing program. And once I knew what building it was going on, I would measure the distance across. Usually it was around 2 3/4 to 3 inches. and I would size it accordingly. And then I would print it out on glossy photo paper, cut it out, glue it onto a piece of thin styrene plastic, and then I could glue the plastic onto the front of the building. And so I have authentic signs on my Flatbush Avenue here, which when people look, find interesting. So street details, they include the street itself and then stuff that's on or near the street. Streets are never one color. Weather, oil, exhaust, and repairs all result in streets that are a multitude of colors and patterns. So don't be afraid to weather your streets. Darkening the roadway in the center of the lane, prototypical of the oil and exhaust, as I said, that accumulate over time. Sections of road are often dug up and then repaved with a different color asphalt or concrete. So don't be afraid to use different colors on sections of your road. Cracks in the road are typical, especially asphalt. Typically, road crews will come around and fill them with a bead of tar. You can use a black fill tip pen to easily draw these cracks on your roads. Many urban and even suburban roads have sewers and utilities running under them. So you can buy manhole covers, HO scale, I know at least. They're printed out, etched brass. But you can buy those, paint them, and glue them on your road, and you got some realistic looking manhole covers. Now, roads are mostly arched, and most of us probably don't really try to represent that arch. It's a lot of trouble. But they're arched so water can drain to the sides. But what you can do is if you have curbs on your, like sidewalks and stuff, add the rainwater sewer drains where the water meets the curb, where the road meets the curb. They actually make drains that you can glue down. Again, the etched brass. I typically paint them a gray color, and then I will paint black underneath them so they stand out. On many streets, utility poles are parallel to the street, and the utility poles themselves really hold a wealth of detail. Today's utility poles, they'll hold transformers, capacitor banks, telephone cables. A lot of them have what's called load break switches, so they can disconnect and isolate sections. And most utility poles are going to carry three-phase electricity, which is 3 wires, and then maybe they'll have a ground wire, which would be a 4th. Note that wires are not taut. The utilities purposely put a sag in them, okay? So you don't have to stretch them really tight across there. You can leave a little sag in them. Add transformers to your utility poles. They're available as a detail item. I think probably Walters has them or something. I use dark thread for my wires. And then I use a heavier thread, or actually a yarn, for the telephone cables that will run below the electric lines. But it's a little hard to see, but if you look up in that upper middle, that's a telephone pole that has not only threaded electric lines that are thread, but also a black yarn line that's telephone. And I think there may be a transformer up there too. Transformer banks make an interesting detail. You see these along the side of the road every now and then. Some of them are capacitor banks. Some of them I think are transformer banks. But basically you bring your 3-phase lines in, they go down to the transformers, and then they come back out. Usually when it's a capacitor bank, the reason they put them there is because they want to get the voltage and the current back in phase and the like. But these are kits you can buy. Unfortunately, I can't remember who manufactures them, but they come with the 2 poles and those metal castings. I thought this was great. This is on Bernie Halloran's layout. This is his weathering of one of his roads. And as you can see, you know, he put the dark he put the dark where the tires go, which still looks realistic and stuff. You can see he's got a filled-in tar crack right about in the middle there, in the lower middle. He's got some more tar and the like. Here's some more road detail on Bernie's layout. Again, you can see he's got the road weathered. He's got the stripes down the middle, which means no passing. And then he's got a couple of spots there that look like they're more than just dribbling tar into a crack, but actually maybe filling some spots. And just another shot showing some of his weathering on his road. You'll notice there's a couple of black splotches where they would, in theory, there might have been a pothole. And so the road crews came along and threw some asphalt in there and then rolled it down. And just another shot. Again, he's got some tar lines there, filling cracks. Over there and sort of just to the left of the lower middle, it looks like there was some sort of a pothole that was filled with a dark tar or asphalt. And one more, again, just some general weathering on his roads, but I think they really look good. Here's some crossing detail he put on one spot of his layout. You can see the cracks in that middle section between the two tracks in there. Again, it looks like, he used a felt tip pen to draw the cracks in and the like, and then there's some light weathering, it looks like, as well. And just in terms of detail, this I thought was neat because he's got a 2-lane road, and then he's got a couple of barrels to warn people that it's necking down into a one-lane road, which is something that a lot of times you don't really see on a layout. Here's some scenes I put on my layout. This was a utility truck doing some utility work on a telephone pole, or utility line, or utility pole, I should say. And you'll note that in right in front of the rear of the truck there, there's a utility worker with a sign directing traffic around it. There's looks like a sawhorse, I guess I would call it, with a flasher on it, which actually I have it. It's on a flasher, so it actually flashes. And then on the other end, by the front of the truck, you can see there's another utility person with a sign, again, directing traffic. So this is the kind of stuff where, people look and then they say, hey, look what's going on. And then, if you look on the left, I've got some crews putting up a billboard over there. So again, it's their eyes go first maybe to the utility truck, and then they'll see, hey, someone's putting up a billboard. Add crossing gates and flashers if you've got grade crossings. At least today, most railroads have gates and flashers at any kind of a crossing, unless it's a rural crossing. And most of the time, if it's a siding or something, they'll probably have somebody get out of the train, a conductor, and go up and stop traffic before the train comes. But again, you can see on both sides of the track, I've got gates, and they actually work on my layout. But even if they don't, you can put them there, even if they're not operating or anything. They still very much add to the scene. This may be a little bit over the top. I'm modeling New York City and New York and Long Island, and I noticed some time ago that most of my cars really didn't have any license plates, or if they did, they didn't look like New York plates. So I actually started putting some license plates on my vehicles. I went on Google, found a 1962 New York State license plate. That's roughly the year I was modeling. I printed them out. I copied it over, so I had a whole bunch of them, maybe about 50 or 100 on a page. I scaled them down actually to 187, so they're kind of small. I printed them out on glossy photo paper. Then I just sat there with scissors, cut them out, and got a pair of tweezers and put a little bit of glue out on a piece of paper, and I would just dip them in and set them on there and glue them on the back of the cars. But I think it really added some realism, considering it's New York, so they should all have New York license plates. So here's a couple others. You can see the yellow plates on the front there. There's a police car and another looks like a 40s convertible with New York plates. Don't tell anybody, but they're all the same. So if you look at them real hard, they all have the same license plate number. I wasn't that much of a stickler. Just a few more with some license plates on them. You can customize vehicles. This adds a little bit of realism and detail. Lilco was the Long Island Lighting Company, which was the utility on Long Island. They're no longer in existence. It's now LIPA, which is the Long Island Power Authority. But back then it was Lilco, and they basically use yellow as their kind of a logo color. So I have a power plant on my layout that I deliver coal to, that is a Lilco plant. And so I had a couple trucks there, and I figured, well, they should be Lilco trucks. So I made some decals on the computer. Very easy to do. Just get clear decal paper and print them out. And then I put them on the side. I still got to weather this vehicle. I just did this one a little bit ago. But I did it on the side and on the back. And again, it adds detail. So that truck is actually, part of the company. Don't just have cars all over the place on you. You can have cars pulling trailers. Long Island is everyone in Long Island lives within 20 miles of the water. So there's a lot of boats down there. So I have figured, there ought to be people pulling boats. So I have, this car pulling a boat. Notice I tried to add some stuff. I put a windshield on it and I put a strap around it, again, to add realism. Usually you don't tow a boat without a safety strap holding it down. And most boats, motorboats like that, would have a windshield, which was just a thin piece of plastic that I glued on there. And I did add a little steering wheel. I can't remember where I found that, but it was added a little bit of detail on it. For buildings, buildings shouldn't be plain. Most buildings have detail on them. Commercial buildings with flat roofs should have a means of access to the roof. Usually it's an access hatch or a stairwell. They'll have plumbing vents. Even your house has plumbing vents. You'll have skylights on some, various kinds of roof vents, air conditioning units, air conditioning ductwork, antennas, especially if you're modeling before cable TV. There'll be equipment left on them, ladders, cans, etc., from people working up there. And a lot of the flat roofs are covered with either tar paper, or they'll have tar paper and then they'll have gravel on top of them. So here's some roof details in my New York City scene. You'll see I've got some skylights. There's roof vents. You'll see those little squares there. Those are access hatches that would lift up, and there would be either a ladder or something where people could climb up and then get onto the roof. On Marshall's place, you can see I got a couple TV antennas sticking up there. There's again a plumbing vent right over there in front of that car billboard, and that's a stairwell coming up. It's not a roof hatch, but a stairwell that you would actually walk up a set of stairs and walk out. Those are available castings. You can usually find them, probably Walters has them or on eBay or something. But they're not hard to come by. Just here's some more roof detail on one of my buildings. Again, a couple of vents and a stairwell entrance. For building side details, window treatments, most buildings will have something in the windows, whether it's curtains or shades. The other thing I do with my buildings is I put wax paper behind the clear glazing. What it does is it'll let light in or out, okay, but it blocks the view inside. If you have a building and you just put the acetate, the clear acetate on the windows, people look in there, and a lot of times they can see there may be light coming from other windows. What they're going to see is the inside of a plastic kit and the like, which doesn't look very realistic. I found, though, if I put wax paper, it kind of blurs, obviously, so they can't see in, okay, but it lets light in and it lets light out, so it doesn't look like it's dark or black in there. And it works very well, whether you have interior lights in your buildings or not, okay. Prior to the advent of central air conditioning, windows often had window air conditioning units in them or window fans. So if there are companies that sell those castings, you know, depending on what era you're modeling, stick a couple of air conditioning units or window fans in some of the windows. Awnings were also used a lot to keep out direct sunlight and keep places cooler. And I think you can get awnings for many of the what's the City Classics buildings. I think they actually make awnings now that you can glue on. They're molded plastic. Most smaller buildings, both commercial and residential, have electric lines or a roof or lines coming in from a utility pole. They'll connect above the roof and then travel down a metal conduit to an electric meter. So here on my layout, you can see, well, you can see there's an air conditioner sticking out of a window. And then in the middle there, you can see I've got a conduit coming down from the roof onto an electric meter. And I think maybe Details West sells these. You can get the castings, and you get a bunch of them in a pack. And usually the electric lines coming from the transformers go into a power head. And these are available also, I think, like from Details West. But you can see they mount up on the roof over on the right there and the left. And what you do is you would run the three high voltage lines coming from from the transformer, because the transformer, remember, that's taking probably about maybe 600 volt electricity that's on those wires, and it's knocking it down to 110 volts. And so you would run 3 wires or even 1, depends if you want single phase or 3 phase, to those posts on the left side of that power head there. As you see those 3 little knobs there, you would run them to that, and then you would run a wire from them to the underside of that power head that sort of looks like a grayish, light gray turtle thing sticking out. That's where the wires would go down into a conduit that would run down the side of the building to the electric meter, like over here on the left, and then into the building. Here's some building details on Bernie Halloran's layout. Again, you can see he's got some kind of, looks like an alarm or something there, right to on the right side of that, the last window on the left. You see he's got a couple of roof vents. He's got a window fan up in the up in that 3rd window over. and the like. Note that some of the windows are bricked over. They're not all open. One of them's half bricked. Again, that's just detail that kind of breaks up the scene so it doesn't look monotonous. Here's some more building details on Bernie's layout. Note he's got the fire escapes over there on the left. Note that some of the windows, those squares, are blocked out. There's on that end in the middle, on the second floor, there's a red square. And then down on the first floor, he's got some different colors, some light tans, it looks like. And then he's got some roof detail, if you can see up on the top, some vents and the like. On my layout, I've got some high-rise buildings. Again, I'm modeling New York City and Brooklyn and Queens. So most of these apartment buildings would have fire escapes on them. So I put fire escapes on my buildings. You can buy these from Tishy. They come as a kit. I think you get 6 of them or something in a kit. Very easy to glue together and put on the side of a building. But again, it adds some detail to the building. It's not just a plain, uniform building. And again, you'll notice I try to put shades and stuff in the windows that are different. Since everybody's not going to have their shades at the same level, or whether they're open or closed. Let's talk about track detail. Most of us are familiar with track detail, so I'm not going to really spend a lot of time on this. But railroads, just like a regular road, they're going to have signs. They're going to have whistle, yard limit, speed limit signs, etc. Stay off the bridge signs, wherever, where they're appropriate. So don't be afraid to put signs next to your tracks. Weather your rails. Real rails are not shiny, except on the top. Most of the time, they're kind of a rust, reddish gray. A lot of it depends on the ballast and the typical conditions in that area where you're modeling. But it's typically a grimy color of some sorts. Replacement or replace ties are often left next to the track. So if they're going to replace ties, you're going to see a stack of new ties sitting right next to the tracks. If they've already replaced them, you may see some old ones or some broken ones sitting next to the rails. They just either didn't take them away yet or whatever. But you see these a lot. I just drove up to Frederick, Maryland a couple days ago, and sure enough, there was a whole stack of brand new ties sitting right next to where Route 85 crosses over the railroad tracks in Buckystown. Ballast is usually not clean, so some weathering on lighter colored ballast kind of helps. Again, my thing is, is everything is not, squeaky clean. Once it's outside, it's going to get some kind of grime on it. So a little, even light ballast or light weathering kind of helps. Trash, old tires, barrels, you often find junk next to the tracks, okay? And then signals, whether they're functional or not, add to the realism. You don't really need to have to put in an operating signal system just to put signals on your layout. You can put in signals that don't work, but they look realistic. It makes the scene look realistic, okay, because that's what you see in real life. This is a shot I took. I was up in Frederick a number of years ago, and there's a Y up there, of all things, and I took a drive over to it. And here's on a Y that is really not used very much, but it's got looks like some rather fresh piles of ballast sitting right next to it, and it's got 2 signals on it, of all things, which I found kind of interesting. But again, it's the realism, okay? I mean, here's just a simple Y, and you see piles of ballast, looks like some fresh ballast on there, and then a couple of signals. Here's a couple of shots I just on my layout. I've got some tie stacks over here. Note I have a station sign. I'll talk about those in a little bit. And then there's a whistle sign over on that top one on the right. Down on the bottom, again, electrical boxes. I model the third rail on the lines that go into Manhattan from my Jamaica station. And they have to be electrified. So there's an electric box with cables running to provide the power to the third rail. And again, stacks of ties next to a couple old tires. Signs. As I pointed out back in those pictures of the Rockville train station, there were like 16 signs in that one photograph. Signs are everywhere, okay? As you drive around, it's rare when you are not within sight of at least one sign, okay? There are long roads to inform drivers. There are also long roads to advertise. Signs are on buildings. They're on the sides, the roofs, the windows. This is in rural Dickerson, Maryland, which is way out in the western part of Montgomery County. There's nothing really. It's just a very rural area, farmland and the like. And yet you look at all the signs coming up to the overpass. That's railroad train, Dickerson Station, which would be on the right just out of the picture. But you can see there's a no parking sign sticking up there. There's a scenic bypass or whatever, C&O Canal Tour sign. See there's a yellow and black stripe thing that shows you're going over a little bit of like I think it's a culvert, which water runs underneath. There's some signs on the other side of the street that are backwards. I can't even tell you what's on them, but I mean, here's in the middle of nowhere, and you've got just a whole plethora of signs. Here was one on Bernie's layout I thought was neat. Which was a welcome to Sparta. I guess I think he custom made this, because I have no idea you would buy something like this. But I thought it was really neat. He's got the lights on it and the like, and then as you usually see when you come into a town, all of the service clubs put their emblems on them. Here's that crossing again. You can see at the very end, he put the sign with the double arrow, which means you can turn right, or if you turn left, you go into that parking lot, but you got to stop. You can't go straight forward. Here's some on my layout. You can see if you start down on the sort of the lower middle right there, there's a railroad crossing sign. I'm trying to read what that one says. I think it's a truck entrance sign. It says the sign went right in front of that fire hydrant. Then there's a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit sign. Then there's the railroad crossing. On the other side, I think I have one that says 25A, and then there's another speed limit. There's another one that shows there's a curve ahead. And then you can see I've got some on the left side there as well. So again, just when you're driving around, just take note of all the signs that you see on the side of the road, okay? And you'd be surprised really when you think about it, how many there are. And if you really want to, you can duplicate that on your layout and really make it look realistic. As I said before, don't forget about your trackside approach signs to stations. If you have stations, okay, most stations will have a sign that announces what that station is. So when that passenger car is rolling in and people look out the window, they know what station they're coming up on. And they'll usually put maybe two of them, at least up in New York. On Long Island, there'd be a couple. There'd be one, one kind of further away from the station, and then one closer up, and then one on the station. So I added all of these. Again, I make these very simply on a computer, print them out. These you can print out on paper or decal, whatever you want to do. And just glue them up on a piece of styrene plastic. And I put a couple of round rod pieces of plastic and drilled them and mounted them next to the tracks. Here's some more signs in my layout. There's a no parking sign on the right there. There's a no parking sign, and there's a weight limit, 25-ton sign. There's a slow sign. There's an entrance sign, and then above on the girder, on that green girder on the L, there's an arrow that points and says there's parking. Don't forget about street signs too. I try to put these on my layout. They can be a little tricky because if you want to make them realistic and stuff, you got to kind of glue them in an X shape. But if you put the decals of the street sign, the street name, put them on first, and then just glue it together on styrene plastic, it seems to work and the like. And you can get some nice, it adds some realism. Weathering, okay. In general, anything that's outside and not new or freshly painted is going to show signs of weathering. Weathering can vary from mild to severe. So you weather your structures in a prototype manner. You got to basically kind of scratch your head and say, okay, how long is this structure or this car or this whatever, how long has it been out and the like, and how well should it be weathered? Is it fairly new? Is it been out there forever and looks like crap or what? Most structures will have variations in weathering from one to another, unless they were all built at the same time. A lot of times you'll have a building and the next one next door was torn down and rebuilt at a later time. So they're going to be different. So they shouldn't all look the same. Explore various techniques. Weathering is one of the subjects that's, I think, kind of been beat to death over and over at clinics and at conventions and the like. But it's good because everyone has their own methods and everything, and you can learn all those. Airbrush oversprays with diluted grimy colors and the like. India ink and stuff with alcohol. Self-adhering pastels, which I like, are easy. And there's some other ones. There's some new ones now that make rust spots, which are really nice. I'll show you those in a minute. But appropriate weathering really adds some realism. So what do you weather? Well, you weather your track, you weather your rolling stock, your vehicles, your engines, your roads, your fences. This Bernie Halloran's layout again. You can see that building in the back. He's done some nice weathering. It's metal, obviously, corrugated. So he's got a lot of gray, or I'm sorry, rust. Showing the rust that you would see on a corrugated metal building. You can see the weathering on the road. Even the building has some white weathering on the roof, it looks like, that white building and the like. So he really did a good job. And you can see his track is also weathered. It's not all shiny silver. Here's another on Bernie's layout. Again, the corrugated roof with rust. The ramp you can see going up to that loading dock. That's weathered. With some gray and stuff. And you can actually, when you look at the building, you can see he's got some weathering on the building. That white is not perfectly white. It's got a lot of weathering on it. Junk. Railroads often run behind industrial buildings or out of the way. And there are often areas where people leave junk. So it accumulates. Think about where you want to put a trash pile. This is actually on my layout. It's under the elevated railroad in New York City. I also have a set of grade level tracks that run under the elevated. But next to it, I found a pile of trash. That's actually a cast pile of trash. You paint it. The car is a junk car, and then some tires, some ties. But again, just add some realism. It's not just a blank space under there. And here's just some more trash. Another old junk car, some tires sitting next to the tracks. I think this was on Bernie's layout. Here's a drain culvert. And of course, when it comes down and the water stops flowing, the trash accumulates. And he did a nice job of putting that trash right there. It looks very realistic. Here's a newspaper sign, or a newspaper blown against the sign. So, you know, there is trash blowing around everywhere. Here's another newspaper on one of my buildings that blew against it. And there's graffiti, at least in New York. So I've got a lot of graffiti on this wall, this retaining wall next to tunnel entrance on my railroad. Some of it I made myself. If you actually go online, you can download for free graffiti fonts, and you can make your own graffiti. Okay, or I think you can buy decals that have graffiti on them. One of the problems with making your own is that you really have to you can only do it in black, unless you've got an Alps printer that prints white or light colors. But any kind of light color printed on decal or clear decal paper is going to get totally lost on a dark background. So I have a combination here. The white ones there, I think, came off of a commercial decal with graffiti, and the black ones I made myself. Here's some more on the side. These I made myself. You can paint it on. I remember when I was a kid growing up, and this was in 1964, Barry Goldwater was running for president, and on one of the bridges in going over a road, actually, at the time, somebody had painted AU, H2O, and then an arrow in 64, which means Goldwater in 64. So I thought I'd put that on one of my bridges. Here's some detail on a rolling stock, just a reefer. You can see I've got some weathering on it, pastel weathering. I've got graffiti on it. And then you'll notice those rest spots on there. There's a decal, I can't remember the company. If anybody wants to know, I can let you know. But you can buy decals that actually have those rust spots with the streaks on them. And you can just cut them out and you can put them on the side of your cars or wherever, your rolling stock. Okay, and it really gives it a good realistic look. Here's another one that I got. I think these were commercial decals. They're white, but some weathering on the bottom part of that boxcar, and then some graffiti. Last one is background and perspectives. A key element of achieving realism is to make sure your scenes look believable. And background scenes should be smaller than the foreground scenes, so you get the illusion of depth. And we call this forced perspective, actually. And you can get this in a number of ways. Use backdrops that show scenes that appear to be in a distance. I've seen a lot of people leave a gap between the scenery that's closest to the wall and the wall itself. In other words, there may be a hill going up, and then you would think that the hill is falling, down on the other side. And then behind it, you would have smaller stuff, so it looks like it's in the distance. There's a gap in there. Depending on the gauge in which you model, use background buildings, vehicles, etc., that are smaller scale than the scale you're modeling it. So, for example, if you're an HO scale, use N scale buildings or vehicles for background scenes. This is Bernie Halloran's layout. He's HO, but those buildings up there are all N scale on his layout, and it makes, when you're looking at his when you're looking there, standing in the aisle, he's got tracks down just below the bottom of the picture there where you can't see, but when you look up, all those buildings look much further away than what they really are because they're N scale. On my layout, the building in the front, that Peels building, that gray building, that's all HO scale. But you can see the buildings behind it are all N scale. And what I do is I buy the N scale buildings, I guess it's City Classics. And I just use the building fronts or the building rears. I don't use the side, or you can use the sides if you can modify them enough. But I paint them, and then what I do is I make a trapezoidal piece of paper here that's, you can see the way it to give the perspective of the side of the building, and I kind of paint that a dark red brick color that you would see, maybe with with shadow on it, and that gives the illusion of depth. And just here's a couple more on my layout. These are the two on the left there are building backs, obviously, and then on the right, that one in the right middle is a building front, and then I think the one on the far right is a building rear again. But again, you noticed I put those kind of brick colored sides on it, trapezoids, and that makes it looks like it's going back. So anyway, I hope these examples gave you some ideas. That's really what I was trying to do, is give you ideas how to add details, where you can add details, what to look for when you're out driving around. Sources of detail parts, they're available, Walther's catalog, local hobby shops, your own model or junk drawer, for example. I love to peruse eBay for stuff. You can find weird stuff on there sometimes that's no longer manufactured or whatever. So that's always fun to do. But as I said, most of all, be observant as you travel around, and really kind of take note of what you're seeing, what the detail is and the like. So with that, I'm done, and if anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to answer.